Garrels. I've been married to my sweet husband, Rick, for just short of 24 years. And we have two wonderful boys, Braden and Tyler. Braden had to work today, so he's not here, but Tyler's there. And both our boys graduated from New Middleton Elementary School and then Smith County High School. Braden is up at Tennessee Tech, and Tyler just finished his freshman year in Chattanooga. We've moved to Smith County about 17 years ago and loved it here. We've kind of moved from all over and decided to raise our kids here. So we've been here ever since. I have a wonderful story about God's love. And a lot of time, God pours his love into a whole group of his children at once, like at church here on an Easter Sunday or a regular Sunday. And sometimes, often, he pours his love out on just everybody, regardless of whether they know him or trust him or believe in him, like just every day when you have a beautiful sunrise or when the rain soaks, when there's been a drought. But sometimes God tailors his love for one person individually in a way that may make sense to only that one person individually, and that's my story. So my story starts about 9 years ago. My boys were just finishing the 4th grade and the 6th grade at New Middleton, and the superintendent at that time had chosen not to renew the contract of the principal at the school. And we all loved the principal of our school, so we went to school board meetings and we went to the parent meetings and we did what we could to support her, and we did what we could to try to change the superintendent's mind. But by the end of the summer, it was pretty clear that we were going to have a new principal. Now, I heard a teaching by Beth Moore several years before that, where she said sometimes you get in the midst of a struggle, you get so busy fighting with that you forget what you're fighting for. And so at the end of summer, I kind of stepped back, and I thought, well, what am I really fighting for in all of this? And I thought, I'm fighting for New Middleton to be the best place for my two kids to go to school on the planet. So as school started, the best way that I could think to continue to fight for was to go to support the new principal and the old principal, was to go to the PTO meeting, the first PTO meeting of the year. And this does not sound like a very big thing, probably, but it was a big thing for me because I'm not a meeting person at all. I'd been to the first PTO meeting when Braden was in kindergarten, and I had not been back for 8 years. I was more than happy to volunteer, and I'd sign up and volunteer at all the events, and I'd participate in all the activities, but I just didn't like to go to the meetings. But I felt like this meeting was kind of the one place where there was common ground in all the issues that were going on in that school at that time. So I prayed. I remember going out and sitting on the deck and praying for the meeting and praying for the school, and I went. And through some really unfortunate set of circumstances, I left that meeting elected as the vice president of the PTO. So I went to every PTO meeting that year. And fast forward a whole school year, my kids are now starting the 6th and the 8th grade, and I go to that PTO meeting, first one of the year, and I'm ready to pass the torch to somebody, the vice presidential torch, to somebody in that school who's got younger kids. And but what I didn't realize was over the course of that summer, the PTO president, who's one of those PTO lifers who's just in it and in it every year, she'd moved outside the county. So I left that PTO meeting as the president of the PTO. It's horrifying. So even though the new principal had been there for a whole year, there were still a lot of really hard, really hurt feelings within the school over that whole issue. There were a small group of parents and actually of teachers who were so entrenched in that battle that they really couldn't support the new principal. And they wanted everything that she did to fail, and that kind of bled over into the PTO, and they wanted everything that we did to fail also. So there were some really difficult moments over those 2 years as part of the PTO. The kids were all doing great. The kids loved her. The kids were fine, but the parents were struggling. The adults were struggling. But I really believed that my part being in the PTO was something that I could do right then. It was the one thing that I could do, and where God could use me to be a small part of the healing of a broken place. For whatever reason, I was able to see all the different sides of that issue and continue to fight for the school instead of with somebody. And I think that everybody is called to that at some point in their lives, or multiple times in your life, where you're called to fight for someone and to help heal a broken place or a broken person because you can see something that somebody else in their situation just isn't able to see yet. So anyway, that's my philosophy. Back to PTO. If you're familiar at all with New Middleton School, especially in that era of time, you'll know that the big PTO fundraiser for the year is the Fall Festival. And they do a big turkey dinner and a cakewalk and a toy walk and a silent auction. It's a huge deal. Where our little group of PTO officers, we were a hot mess because only 2 of us had helped put one of those together. That'd been the year before. And so we'd all volunteered, we'd all participated, but we'd never actually put it all together. And we were the blind leading the blind, we didn't have a clue. So I was praying mightily. My sweet husband was praying all the time. My mother lives in Denver. I called her, she's praying. My mother-in-law's in Anchorage, and she's praying. And we've been in a Bible study for years and years and years. They heard every detail every week, and they were praying for it. So finally, the big night arrived. It was the day of the Fall Festival, and we had stuff going on in every corner of that school building. And these next few things I'm going to tell you are very important to my story, so you got to focus in on this. First, I went to the 8th grade teacher that morning, and I was talking with her. And she was in charge of the turkey dinner. She was the one in charge of the kitchen. And she was panic-struck because we didn't have enough volunteers. So we were talking, and I said, don't worry about it. I can work in the kitchen. It's going to be fine. We'll have enough people. Don't worry. So she said, okay, all right. So then later, about mid-afternoon, I drove to Lebanon, to O'Charlie's restaurant, and I picked up 400 warm, fresh dinner rolls and stuck them in the back of my minivan and drove across the highway to Demas's and picked up 400 more warm, fresh dinner rolls and then drove them back to the school. They'd all donated those. And that was the most amazing drive of my life with the windows rolled up and 800 rolls. Oh, my gosh, that was like paradise. And then the last thing to kind of, as part of my story, I was making my last drive back to the school. I'd gone home for the last little bit of supplies, and the next time I drove back to my house, the whole thing would have been over. So I'm making my last drive. My mom calls to cheer me on just one more time. She's in Denver, so she wasn't going to be there. So I told her that I'd be working in the kitchen. And I said, but that's really going to be okay with me because all day long I've been watching parents deliver desserts. The parents were responsible for baking pies and cakes for dessert. So you'd see this stream of stuff coming in. And then I'd had that drive with 800 dinner rolls. That was amazing. And then when we kind of first got going, they said we should get Milo's sweet tea. So I'd called, and Milo's sweet tea had donated 80 gallons of sweet tea. And everyone said, well, that's the best sweet tea. And I'd never had it before. So I told my mom, it's going to be okay, I'm working in the kitchen, because sometime over the course of serving all these people, I'll be able to have a piece of dessert and a couple dinner rolls and a big glass of sweet tea. So that's very important. I said, I want a piece of dessert, a couple dinner rolls, big glass of sweet tea. So she wishes me luck. I get to the school, I walk in the door. Well, it turns out they didn't need me in the kitchen after all. They had plenty of volunteers. So I sat at a table in the entryway, and I didn't move for the next 5 hours. I sold tickets. I greeted everybody that came in the door, sold tickets to the dinner and tickets to the cakewalk and tickets to the toy walk. And it was just pandemonium, chaos. And so at one point, I gave Braden a couple dollars and said, go get me a Dr. Pepper and a hot dog from concessions, and that was my dinner. So the whole thing, about as soon as it started, it seemed like it was over. The whole thing ended, and it was successful. It was good. Everybody had a good time. We had fun. We made the money that we needed. It was good enough. It was over, and that was great. And that would have been enough. But our God is not the God of just good enough. Our God is the God of lavish, lavish love. And our God is the God who sees each one of us individually and loves each one of us beyond measure, individually, for absolutely no other reason than because we're here and we're His. And that is a total blast. That's really fun. So remember my conversation 6 hours earlier with my mom. I want a piece of dessert, couple dinner rolls, big glass of sweet tea. So everybody has left. The only people left in the school building are the 4 PTO officers, the principal and her husband, and a couple of security guards. Well, the treasurer is in the principal's office, and she's counting all the money and sorting through it, and she's got cash boxes all around her. And she hands me the keys to her car and says, could you go to the parking lot and get the PTO checkbook so I can pay the security guards and send them home. So I go out in the parking lot, and I meet up with the vice president. Now, the vice president at this point is about 7 months pregnant. She's got a 3-year-old on one hip who's very tired and slightly cranky, and she's got this foil-covered pan in her other arm, and she's fumbling, trying to get into her car. Well, she sees me, and she looks at me with that look of exasperation and relief, and she says, "Do you want this?" And it was not the 3-year-old. It was the, thankfully, it was the foil pan. And I said, "I don't know. What is it?" She said, "It's leftover dinner rolls." I said, "Well, yes, I think I do want that." So I take the big foil pan of dinner rolls, I put it in my van, I get the checkbook, help her get settled in her car, and I go back in. The only thing we had left to clean at that point is the gymnasium. So I've got my big trash can on wheels, and I'm rolling it along by the stage, and I'm throwing away soda cans and nacho cheese trays and chip bags and hot dog wrappers and all of that. And in amongst all of this garbage on the stage is this 9x9 foil pan with a clear plastic lid, and it's all tied up in a lavender bow, and inside is a pristine, perfect, untouched, delicious German chocolate cake. And I look around this empty gym, and I'm like, I think that's for me. So I take the cake, and I put that in the van next to the dinner rolls, and we finish cleaning, and I said our goodbyes, and we go home, and I pull in the carport, and Rick comes out. He'd left when the thing was over with Tyler and Braden and a couple of their buddies who would have been no help whatsoever cleaning. So they were home, and Rick comes out to help me, and I hand him the big thing of dinner rolls, and I grab the cake, and we're walking in, and he says, "I met the Shays in the parking lot." And the Shays are good friends of ours who had volunteered in the kitchen. They were the reason I didn't have to work in the kitchen. He said, "I met the Shays in the parking lot. They said there were 2 gallons of leftover sweet tea, so they gave me one." And Rick had no idea of the conversation I had had with my mom earlier that day. But God had heard every single word. And God was not about to leave me with just a good enough fall festival. He wanted to remind me that I was loved. So he gave me a dinner pan full of, or a huge pan full of dinner rolls, an entire German chocolate cake, and a gallon of sweet tea. They were blessings, all mine, with 10,000 beside. Just in case that I had missed the point, which thankfully I didn't, but just in case, Braden walked in right then, and Braden was the only one who'd really participated in the cakewalk. And he said, "Hey, Mom, guess what I won?" And of all the hundreds of things that had been given away in the cakewalk that night, in between the dinner rolls and the German chocolate cake, he puts down a Bible that Lifeway had donated. And in that Bible it says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And my table was set with dinner rolls and German chocolate cake, and my cup overflowed with sweet tea. I am so loved, and you are so loved. You are so, so loved. Don't ever forget that. The very hairs of your head are numbered. And that is my story.